session, I'd like to make a public announcement. As many of you know, we have in Holyoke and surrounding towns a lot of Latino students who would like to enter these colleges and universities in the area, and it's not always possible for them to do so. So a group of folks many years ago, 25 years ago now, got together and founded something called the Latino Scholarship Fund, which is devoted primarily to supporting and financing those students on, and also recognizing community leaders and their contributions to the health and continuation of activity in the community. Every year there is a banquet in May at which both things occur: the recognition of the community leaders and the awarding of the scholarships. The emphasis this year is going to be a lot on getting the colleges and university faculty of the area involved, and the staff as well, in helping us to make a difference. So you are all invited to join with us in saying with the community, "Si se puede," to Latino students. I'm reading from the general invitation. The rising cost of attending college has led to increased frustration and even despair among working class Latino youth in our region. In response, a small group of Latino educators and community advocates have been raising funds to award community-based scholarships to these deserving students. The Latino Scholarship Fund, a nonprofit organization, gives scholarships to high-need students in Holyoke and surrounding communities at its annual banquet, a major celebration in Holyoke. The event recognizes exemplary local Latino and ally community members and college faculty and staff while celebrating student achievement. To challenge the limited exposure of these students to Latinos who are contributing on campuses and in communities, the Latino Scholarship Fund publicly awarded the scholarship at the annual Latino Scholarship Fund banquet in May, at which current recipients meet previous recipients already in college, faculty and staff from nearby colleges, community leaders, and Latino Scholarship Fund banquet honorees. Some of the Latino and non-Latino adult professionals working in a range of fields to improve and enrich communities in the region. Students' intense response to these, to meeting these individuals. Many of these students have never even seen a Latino faculty member. To meeting these individuals and receiving scholarship support raised primarily from their community members suggests the powerful impact of this occasion. The increased support from faculty and staff from all colleges in the region would strengthen our initiative. Our students deserve it. We are asking you to join with us then to attend the banquet on Tuesday, May 23rd at the Log Cabin in Holyoke, to meet some of the students, to celebrate their determination and resilience, to make them feel inspired and to yourself be inspired, and your presence alone will speak volumes to these young people. So I have some invitations here. If you want further information, you can email Marquez at hampshire.edu. Okay. And thank you for allowing me that interview. And now let me first introduce myself. I'm Roberto Marquez. The professor at Hampshire first, then at Mount Holyoke for many, many years, and now emeritus at both. And my field is Latin American and Caribbean culture and literature, and I also made some effort of being a translator. Today we have with us a very distinguished panel. There's some very heavy hitters. And they're going to be addressing the issue that follows almost in sequence from all the previous ones. We've had so far a lot of the issues and contradictions presented. This panel will be addressing the crisis in terms of analysis and solutions. So let me then move directly to the speakers, each of whom will have 15 to 20 minutes, and then it will be open for questions from the floor and from the panelists to each other if it should work out that way. Our first speaker is Liliana Cotto Morales. She's got a fan club. Liliana Cotto Morales received her BA in Sociology, Literature, and Philosophy from the University of Puerto Rico, and an MA in Social Theory from the New School of Social Research in New York. She is a member of the Association of Puerto Rican University Professors, has served as the coordinator of the PEEP in El Barrio, and was on the committee of the political education in San Juan. In 1989, she became national coordinator of popular education. She brought Paulo Freire to Puerto Rico during Romero Barcelos's period of governorship, and Freire traveled through communities and presented programs in Puerto Rico. She is executive producer of a documentary, Desalambrando, directed by Pedro Rivera, and today is trying to organize projects of popular education she notes with very little success. But I doubt that. She will be addressing the issue of collective actions in response to the colonial despotism of promesa, new vocabularies and strategies.
If there is no feelings of uneasiness, I would certainly like that people move a little bit forward to feel the warmth of the bodies. It's kind of sad to have all those empty chairs in the front. If there is any uneasiness about that, there's no problem, but it's just a question of feeling better. Huh? Bueno, logramos. Míralo, aquí, por favor. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to come home. In a way, Amherst is another home for me. It's part of those experiences that one can call epiphany experiences. I don't know if one can say epiphanic, but these epiphany experiences. So I'm so glad I'm here, and I'm so honored that I've been able to be with friends in different endeavors here. So Sonia was asking me why I was practicing.
It's just that I have to put everything in 20 minutes. And it's difficult for me when there is so much emotion and enthusiasm with the subject that one is dealing with. This is the name. We'll go to the next one. El único camino para pensar el futuro parece ser la utopía. This is de Sousa Santos. But I have to complement that with a phrase that la utopía es un proyecto realizable. So I'm not going to go into that, but Freire used to say that utopia was not an unrealizable project, it was a realizable, un proyecto realizable. Bueno, seguimos. So this is a statement that was presented by one of the projects that I will be working on here, which is Trayecto Dignidad by the collective Somos Dignos. I am not going to read it because Agustin is going to read it. We're going to ask people to sign for it. But in the section that is called Citizens' Actions, they present this material. You know, why is it that we are supporting the strike? Can we go to the next one? Okay. I will focus on collective actions of resistance which may not be mainstream, but express new sensibilities with respect to conflicts, exclusions, inequalities, and other social contradictions. I will be talking about organizations that engage in collective actions against the law promesa. There you have the complete name of the law promesa. These organizations are Trayecto Dignidad, which the organization is really Somos Dignos, Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas, Movimiento Unión Soberanista, Campamento contra la Junta, la organización Vamos, and the spokesperson of Concertación contra la Junta were not able to be interviewed. I have interviewed some of these members in the context of the UPRP work stoppage, and afterwards, when students, professors, and non-teaching employees decided on their national assemblies to turn the stoppage into a strike. So I've been doing this right before coming over here. I am including the actions of the students as another example of strategies called prefigurative strategies. All are organizational initiatives that value participation and democracy. Some, as Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas, engage in direct confrontational actors. Others, as Vamos, pose the need to engage in autonomous, productive, and urbanistic activities to build a new political paradigm. The next one. Here, before, there was the press conference of, if you can go back just for them to see. That was the press conference of Trayecto Dignidad, where they gave the results that I am giving to you in papers, the results of the poll, of the study that they did. And over here is the performing part of Proyecto Dignidad, which means that they do like a show. There is a show, a poll, and dialogue with the people. Okay? So then go. Here, that is the APU, Asociación Puertorriqueña de Profesores Universitarios. Their identity is Profesores Universitarios. We cannot be unionized because legally we cannot unionize, but there is the street and the National Assembly. These are the actions and activities generated by groups like the APU with certain objectives related to their chosen identities and their position in a social conflict. It is my own interpretation of Luci's notion. They may include a variety of work groups, and they say communitarian, patriotic, etc., but they can also be protests, sit-ins, civil disobedience actions, strikes, boycotts, and other social struggles, which, under certain conditions, may develop into a broad fields of social movements. But my opinion is that a public event, a campaign, a controversial meeting, or any other public behaviors are not necessarily equivalent to the movement with capital letters. They have their own value, both empirically and analytically. The fact that a collective action is a collective action and not the movement does not diminish their social and political value at all, nor their value as research subjects. Some see themselves, the next one, as territories of resistance. Within these spaces, grassroots activists are not waiting to change to the change to be structured from above. They commit themselves to developing new anti-hierarchical relationships and participatory dynamics from below. This does not exclude the fact that the same rhetoric is reproduced by other vertical organizations that reproduce vertical relationships and other traditional forms of organization. Participation and horizontalism become the guiding discourses of these activities. Some of them implement strategically novel actions, which are, as we have said, prefigurative processes and practices which are in themselves transformative. And for some of them, they represent a new way of viewing social and political change, a different way of reinventing the left. This is one of the actions of Se Acabaron las Promesas. And one of the things that they say in their interviews, that their actions are surprising, and surprising in two senses. Surprising because people don't expect them, and surprising because when people expect that they'll do something else, they just retreat. And so at this point, as they say, they have not done anything that the others, and we're talking about Carrión and the people from the Junta, etc., were expecting. And so this is the type of direct action that they are talking to. This view has also been developed by Boaventura de Sousa Santos. We can put it here. The next one. When he talks about the World Social Forum as one of the most eloquent manifestations on anti-hegemonic globalization, another word is possible, expresses a transformative perspective of collective actions where participation and democratic processes are central. A strategic approach that is viewed as capable of reconfiguring, says Boaventura, the social transformative practices of the global left. So this is the Social Forum of Puerto Rico, and I have to say that, I don't know if you remember that we brought this is a mobile mural. We did it in cloth. It was 7 feet tall and 70 feet long. And we brought it here, so, but then it was destroyed in front of the Capitol Hill in Puerto Rico. We never knew who destroyed it. So the other one is just to say that these are the organizations. This is Montreal, the World Social Forum in 2016. So just to say that the World Social Forum is still alive. Okay, again. These are the organizations that I tried to interview. The only one that I was not able to interview was the Concentración contra la Junta and the University Strike. Go ahead. And this is the next one. This is like like some sort of a matrix that I prepared in order to organize the investigation. And the categories were date of origin, membership and participants, objectives, theoretical and ideological basis, strategies and tactics, impact in individual and collective subjectivities, strategies of communication, actions against promesa, leadership and organizational structure. Of course, I will not have time to do so here, but it's just for you to know what was the basis of the interview. Go ahead. Next one. The combined actions of organizations, spontaneous groups, individual common citizens initiatives may or may not develop into social movements. And I just wanted to give you a sense. Next one. This is the Rescate movement, which was the first poor people's movement in the 20th century in Puerto Rico, and I've studied it in my book, and it's part of the documentary that I have produced. And the other one, as you see, there are two different strategies, but I don't have the time to talk about strategies, but there are two different tactics in terms of the process of protest. The next one, Vieques, which everybody has seen. So these are two, I would say, precursors of the situation now in Puerto Rico. Nevertheless, there are also both local micro campaigns and broad mobilization, even if they are eminently by the media. They pose proposal vis-a-vis the crisis. But, in my view, the systematization, to use a term of popular education, of these proposals require a conscientious design of transformative praxis in order to build a broad social movement. So it's not a question of spontaneous activities all the time. And the next one, here is Tito Kayak. Tito Kayak has brought to conscience many people. Some people love him, some people hate him, some people discuss about him. So it's in español one can say mediatic, but mediático, I don't know if in English that's correct, but it's a media approach to discuss issues. But I still think that even though Tito Kayak, as a matter of fact, the whole the campamentos in Vieques began with Tito when he said, I am not moving from here. You know, they began with Tito. But there is a need of a more conscientious, systematic process of the development of anti-colonial consciousness in the people. The profile of collective actions and social movements has changed. In response, social actors redefine their identities and alliance strategies and have shifted the locus of their efforts from making demands on the state to attempting to transform society. La próxima. Okay. These initiatives are exemplified in Puerto Rico, besides by organizations, evidently political organizations. And remember, I am talking here about the organizations that I have interviewed. I am not talking about the PPT or the PEEP, etc., etc. I'm talking about those that I am interviewing. But there are others, and that is the growth of communitarian productive enterprises, such as agricultural markets of different kinds. Some examples are the agricultural markets of the Roosevelt Square, the Caimito community, and many in different towns in Puerto Rico. Some are organic, some are not organic. Some have lechon asado, alcapurria, and the others are. So you have a variety because nothing here is black and white. Everything is like a degree, you know? So, these are initiatives to transform society. 15? To transform society. The common denominators between these organizations and other democratic organizations are that they are youth-oriented, that they are not necessarily in confrontation with the state, and could you go to the other one? They are democratic, they defend democratic procedures, and they tend towards a different notion of production. Okay, so what I'm going to say, I'm going to go to the university, and then mention Trayectoria Dignidad, which you have the material of Trayectoria Dignidad. Trayectoria Dignidad, when I get there, we can discuss it. I'm going now to go to the university as an example of this other organization that unhappily I will not be able to discuss unless you ask me questions afterwards. The students at the University of Puerto Rico in the campuses, you can go to the next one. This is the combination of activities, you see? Like for instance, you have the campamento, which is resistant. You have there the campamento with the community organizations that it's called Urbe a Pie, and they're doing the campamento, but also some sort of community work. You have a huerto here, and you have over there the occupation of a building that is called Casa Taf. These are the people that are in this exposition. I will leave the catalog of the exposition in the libraries here. It is a participatory exposition. Among the students on strike, even among those in favor in keeping the university open, and among groups like the ones that are being discussed here, there is a consciousness that difference have to be worked together. Difference should not present effective collective action. This may result in the polarizing political polarization. The present of these actors are two pathologies, as Boaventura says. The representation pathology, these are people that don't feel that they are represented, and the participation pathology, which they want to participate. I am not going to talk about the University of Social Movements, but I am going to say that the strategies being practiced at the UPR vis-a-vis the economic cuts imposed by the Junta are the first steps toward a university, globalized university, a different university, committed to the common good. The university as it is today, the modern university, has to be reformed, but by university people. It requires the strengthening of the university's social responsibility and the creation of the new institution. This kind of organization, if opted for, will take time. In the meantime, a counter-university that creates innovative ways of combining popular and scientific knowledge have to be developed. This is being done by the UPR strike participants and even by those sectors that oppose this strategic decision. And now, I would like to go ahead. This is about Trayecto Dignidad, which the Trayecto Dignidad has had 4 editions. And what they do is that they go north, south, east, and west in buses, and they do these exchanges with the people in the beaches, in plazas, in centros comerciales, etc. And they do three things. They do the performance. They do, could you go ahead with another one? This is the university, so we get there. They do the performance. They do the poll, which you have the results of the poll here. The importance of the poll is that there were 1,200 people that was interviewed, and the results are very different than the results of the opinions as they come out from the press. And that is the important thing. And the Trayecto Dignidad, I think it's important because it's long-term, because it's profound, because it deals with culture, and it deals also with research. And here, now we're going to go to experiences at the university. This is one of the performances of Trayecto Dignidad. Could you go ahead? This is also the logistics aspect of the struggle, because I think that one has to see that the students are not there in a completely disorganized fashion. They have organized food, they have organized the bathrooms. I just wanted you to see the thing of the bathrooms. You have to clean the bathrooms. There is a whole debate in terms of gender about work, you know, and they have the mobilization aspect. Could you go? And this is the performance. Go ahead, go ahead. These are the results. You have those results there, and if you want to look at them, at the end in questions we can discuss those results. That's why I think that they are so important. And this is the Movimiento Unión Soberanista, which is a group of older people, 55 to 60, and the details about the Movimiento Soberanista I can give you if you ask me after. Could you go ahead? Okay, and the Movimiento Soberanista, as you can see, the age, it's different. And this is a comparison. Se acabaron las promesas de Movimiento Vamos, which the movement is younger than Moveranista, but not young, and Campamento contra la Junta, which is this Campamento contra la Junta was founded by 5 women, and the majority of the participants, as the interviewer told me, were women and LGBT and queer groups. And in that sense, women are the Campamento contra la Junta and La Jornada, they don't talk about quotas. I mean, women are dirigentas, that's what they say. And I listen to what they say. So this is an interesting thing, because the whole issue that comes out at the university of gender is being dealt in another fashion. Women are there, they have power, and we don't have to discuss that. If that is true or not, we have to see. And then, I still have 1 minute. University strike. Okay, so here I wanted to deal with issues. These are logistic issues. You know, this is the way the space is organized. If you're an urban sociologist, you're interested in know how the space is organized. First, we saw how the food is organized. And the food is organized from the Centro de Estudiantes. It's distributed. But each portón, each gate, has a food organization on its own. And there's a whole debate about who takes care of that in terms of men and women. But here is the space. This is also the political organization. Okay, the political organization, you see, there is the coordinating group, and there are debates about the power issues, because the people at the gates say that they are autonomous. So the autonomy, the sovereignty of the whole process in the strike is at the level of the gate. But there is this organization that is called the Assembly, but there is called the Pleno. Go ahead. Yeah, I just have a minute. And this is interesting because in Sociales, every day they have a word, an important word. This is the educational aspect. The educational aspect, constant workshops. This is on neoliberalism. There were on women in struggle. There was on the debt. There, Martinez Heriberto went there, you know, talking about alternatives, and to present what they call the bank of proposals. The bank of proposals. Okay? And here I am very proud of my generation, because this is a group of people of my age that have they decided to do murals. And this is one of the murals of Segurola. I don't know if some people know Segurola. So there are about 10 persons about my age that they are doing murals in support of the struggle against Renaissance. This is the visual in support of the auditing of the debt, and the religious groups. that we're supporting. That's another aspect, the interreligious coalition. And here is the front gate of the Puerto Rico, of the Puerto Rican University, UPR. The next one. These are messages that I think that the students are trying to send. La promesa es really good. And this one, I don't have to say anything about that. So this is why I think that with all comings and goings, contradictions, debates, and problems, there is a whole new set of relationships and ideas that are being developed, and that we have to check on them, because probably there is the seed of a future Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Dr. Jorge Duany. Dr. Duany is director of the Cuban Research Institute and professor of anthropology in the Department of Global and Social Cultural Studies in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University. Born in Cuba and raised in Panama and Puerto Rico, Dr. Duany previously served as acting dean of the College of Social Sciences, professor of anthropology, chair of the department, director of the journal Revista de Ciencias Sociales at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. He has held visiting research and teaching appointments at several U.S. universities, including Harvard, Connecticut, Wisconsin, Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the City University of New York. He earned his PhD in Latin American Studies, specializing in anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. He holds an MA in Social Sciences from the University of Chicago and an BA in Psychology from Columbia University. Dr. Duany has published extensively on migration, ethnicity, race, nationalism, and transnationalism in Cuba, the Caribbean, and the United States. He's also written about Cuban cultural identity on the island and in the diaspora, especially as expressed in literature, music, and religion. He has belonged to the editorial boards of academic journals such as Cuban Studies, Latino Studies, Centro, the Latin American and Caribbean Ethnic Studies, and the New West Indian Guide. As someone he's also just published a book called Puerto Rico, Everything You Need to Know. And as someone who has just finished reading that book, I can very highly recommend it. I consider it the most compact, okay, and up-to-date and informed, generally accessible, okay, and non-intimidating presentation of the current Puerto Rican situation that I've read in the last year. And so I would like to very highly recommend it to you. Between February 2003 and March 2017, Dr. Duany wrote a monthly editorial column for the newspaper El Nuevo Dia, and he received the Bolívar Pagan Prize in Journalism from the Institute of Puerto Rican Literature. Okay. Dr. Duany will be addressing the topic economic crisis and migration in Puerto Rico. And without further ado, I give you Professor Duany.
Thank you, Roberto, for your very kind words, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation, as well as to the members of the panel, Roberto, Viviana, Jose, and Emilio. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about something that is quite depressing, And I hope to make it a little more optimistic, especially at the very end, because I think the numbers I'm going to show you document a very difficult situation for thousands of Puerto Ricans who have had to leave the island in the last 10 years or so because of the economic crisis. And unfortunately, I think all the indicators suggest that this massive movement of Puerto Ricans from the island to the mainland will continue, at least in the next decade. So let me begin with a general picture of how population has developed over the past 100 years or so, since the first U.S. census of the island was conducted in 1898, in terms of the population growth. And you probably know this. I'm just going to show you the figures that during the first half of the 20th century, Puerto Rico was growing very quickly, so much so that the dominant perception was that Puerto Rico was a small, overpopulated, little island with few natural resources, and therefore one of the main ways in which development could be obtained was to reducing population on the island. And that's what you see for the first time, actually, in the 1950s and on to this day. And there were a couple of references in earlier panels to the issue of sterilization, which is certainly one of the ways in which the Puerto Rican population growth was kept to a smaller percentage. And of course, migration. Migration served as a safety valve, and that's the word, actually, the expression that was used by the Puerto Rican government and even the colonial government before 1952 in order to export surplus labor, as it was called then. And I'm also reminded of a phrase that Fran Bonilla, the famous scholar of Puerto Rican migration, used at one point in time, in which he said that actually manos a la obra, or Operation Bootstrap, could have been called manos que sobran, because in fact that was the idea. The idea was that you have to get rid of all these excess workers, surplus workers, and relocate them here in the mainland. And of course, be careful what you wish for, because that's exactly what has happened. And I'll show you some figures in a moment. Now, in the 1960s, population growth recovered on the island as migration appeared to be leveling off. But of course, now we know better. We know that migration was never really ending in that period. But there was a return migration flow in the 1970s. I'll just show you the entire sequence, so you'll see what happened. Of course, for the first time in the modern history of Puerto Rico, there was a 2.2% decline between the census conducted in 2000 and the census conducted in the 2010 period. No other state or jurisdiction, I think it was only Vermont perhaps, which also underwent a decline, and no city except for Detroit actually lost population during that period. But then look at what happened in the last 5 years, or in the first 5 years of the current decade. The loss of population actually was even larger than during the early period, the first decade of the 21st century. Something like 8.8% of the population decline. And if you add up those two figures, we're talking about a significant proportion of the population that relocated here in the United States. Of course, I have to say I'm not going to focus on that because of time constraints, but it isn't just migration, it's also the demographic characteristics of Puerto Rico. Fertility rates have come down, mortality rates also as well. And in fact, something that I don't have time to talk about here, return migration has also slowed down. And finally, foreign immigration, especially from the Dominican Republic, appears to have stagnated. So all those demographic factors have contributed to this very difficult demographic picture that I'm going to comment on. And of course, my focus will be on the growth of the Puerto Rican population in the United States compared to the Puerto Rican population on the island. And here are the main figures that I want to comment on. Again, until about 1940, the Puerto Rican population, this is the number of people on the island. Let me show you the other half of the picture. Until 1940, the Puerto Rican population on the mainland was practically insignificant. There were a few thousand people who had settled in New York City. Earlier, some people had left to work in Hawaiian plantations. Some Puerto Ricans have ventured to Cuba or Dominican Republic, but really, and you can see this very clearly here, these are the census figures from the early 20th century to the last estimates in 2015. The spectacular growth of the Puerto Rican population in the mainland, especially after World War II, but sometime in the first decade of this century, in the 21st century, I think it was 2004, for the first time, The census estimated that there were more people of Puerto Rican origin living in the 50 United States, and that has continued to grow, as you can see. And by now, something like 63% of all people who declare themselves to be Puerto Rican, that includes people born on the island as well as descendants of Puerto Ricans born in the U.S., has skyrocketed. And if you project that into the next decade, that will probably continue as the population on the island decreases, and actually the census estimates by the year 2050, there will be less than 3 million people on the island compared to 6 million Puerto Ricans, so double the numbers. So this is a striking demographic phenomenon, and it's one that many scholars on the island and the mainland are trying to grapple with. I myself, I'm not a demographer, but I look at these numbers and try to understand what are the social, economic, and cultural repercussions, as well as probably political ones as well. Just to focus on the more recent immigration from the island to the U.S., I collected these official numbers in the census from 2000 to 2015. And again, you can see pretty much what the pattern has been from about 50,000 people who were leaving per year in the year 2000. The last estimates suggest that we have now reached something like 89,000 people who left the island in just that 1 year. I should also qualify this by saying that we're talking about absolute numbers, not net migration specifically. It depends on how you calculate that. But if you consider net migration, then you would have something like perhaps 65,000, because still you have a small number, 25,000 people who are Puerto Ricans living in the U.S. who are returning to Puerto Rico, as well as their descendants, the so-called Neoliberals, as they're called on the island. So we're seeing a very steady and growing number of Puerto Ricans who, especially since the beginning of the economic recession in 2006, have decided to relocate in the United States. The other important aspect, I think, of this phenomenon is to see some of the geographic redistribution of the Puerto Rican population in the United States. I take this chart from Angelo Falcón, the Atlas of Puerto Rican Migration, which is a little confusing because of all the arrows and so on, but let me just mention some of the main patterns. So Puerto Ricans are still going to New York, and New York is one of the primary destinations, but of course Florida has taken over as the #1 destination for Puerto Ricans. I'll show you some more detailed numbers on that in a moment. Then of course the Northeast area, including Massachusetts, the Boston area, Hartford, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, continue to attract a large number of Puerto Ricans. Smaller numbers were going to Texas and California to the south and the west, and then smaller numbers were going to the Midwest, places in Illinois, Ohio, and so on. Some of the other arrows going back and forth suggest that there's also a redistribution of the so-called Nuyorican population, or the northeastern based Puerto Rican population, who are moving south, and that's a significant number of people. For instance, in Orlando, about half of all Puerto Ricans actually come from this area, from northeastern United States, particularly from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as well as Massachusetts. So you have this this very complicated movement of people going back and forth, circulating, moving from one place to another. I have called it a nation on the move, or nación vaivén, but it's actually getting more complicated than that. It's not just people coming and going, it's establishing new patterns of settlement that I think we're still trying to understand and interpret what that means. In order to make it a little more clearer, I want to focus on the 5 states in which Puerto Ricans have concentrated since World War II. And I begin in 1970 because I think this is when you begin to see the pattern. Until then, New York had been, and unfortunately, this is the red one, the red line here. You can't see the legend. But this is New York, which has always been, since the 1940s and 50s, the main Puerto Rican community. But notice what happens in New York. It grew somewhat in the 20-year period between 1970 and 90, and then it actually declined somewhat in the 1990s, only to recover very slowly, and actually it's a steady pattern in the last couple of decades. If you look at the other, this is New Jersey, the orange line. New Jersey has grown as well. It has been traditionally the second largest Puerto Rican population in the United States. But as we'll see in a moment, and this is Illinois, this is the green line, the growth of the Pennsylvania population as well. But look at what happens when we include Florida. this is really a very striking and very sudden growth of a population that was practically insignificant in 1970. Then after Disney World was opened in 1971, I've used the word Disney Rican before, but I'm not sure that it applies. But anyway, the growth of Puerto Ricans in Orlando, particularly in Florida in general, has been spectacular. And look at what happens in the last decade. The growth of the Puerto Rican population has overcome the number of Puerto Ricans living in New York. So the word Neo-Rican, for instance, if it ever was applicable, and of course it has all kinds of negative connotations, as you know, no longer describes the majority of Puerto Ricans in the U.S. It's actually Floricans, if you want to use that word. Only about 1/3 of all Puerto Ricans in the U.S. are now living in New York. And again, if this trend continues, well, it's already more than 1 million, 1.2 or 3 million people of Puerto Rican origin living in Florida. Clearly, New York City, which again is still the largest single concentration, I'll show you that in a moment, the single largest concentration of Puerto Ricans will be overcome by Orlando, considering Orlando as a major metropolitan area. So where are Puerto Ricans going to now? These are the 10 main counties in the U.S. Over the first 4 years of the 2010 decade. They're going to Florida, particularly to 5 counties in Florida. So beginning from down up to the first one, it's Palm Beach, Broward County, Hartford, of course in Connecticut, Osceola. This is Disney, Hillsborough, which is Tampa, and then look at what happens in Orange County. Orange County is really the epicenter of the new Puerto Rican migration, and the increasing number of Puerto Ricans who are concentrating in that particular county. And if you combine Orange and Osceola, it's even more impressive, with more than 50,000 people just in 4 years. We're not talking about the entire phenomenon. I consulted with some local experts like Roberto Marquez about the appearance of Hamden, Massachusetts, number 9 on the list, which I don't know personally, but I understand it's part of the historical trajectory of Puerto Ricans coming to the Connecticut River Valley, and it has to do apparently with the tobacco industry in the 1940s and 50s, and of course that's also connected to Hartford, Connecticut. Notice that the Bronx, which was until recently number 1 on the list, is now number 3. Orange, Hillsborough, and the other Florida counties are really attracting the largest number of Puerto Ricans in the last decade. And even if you go back in the earlier decade, and you would find the same pattern. So I think this is something that we need to describe and understand better, and I think it has to do with the crisis, the economic crisis in Puerto Rico, as well as different kinds of opportunities and networks here in the United States, and people are choosing different places where they go. There has been a long-term movement away from the large metropolitan areas in the Northeast to mid-sized cities in other parts of the U.S., but clearly the North-South movement is now the prevalent one in contemporary Puerto Rican migration. Another way of illustrating this is to look at the 5 main metropolitan areas. So New York City is still the largest one, with about 800,000 people of Puerto Rican origin, but Orlando has clearly grown in a very quick way. And although I don't see it going to overcome New York in the next few years, it probably will in maybe 20 years or so. And notice too that Miami doesn't figure prominently in anybody's research agenda. And I happen to live in Miami. This is Miami metropolitan area. It's not just the city, but also Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. It has a significant amount. More than 200,000 Puerto Ricans are living now spread out in South Florida. Chicago, which used to be number 2 for a long time, is now really stagnated. Philadelphia is growing, especially outside of the main metropolitan area. So what we're seeing, I think, is a number of shifts in the settlement patterns of Puerto Ricans that imply all kinds of things: new labor markets, networks, opportunities, interactions with other ethnic groups, like, for instance, Cubans in South Florida and other places as well. So it's a new situation that we need to study in more detail and understand better what are the challenges and the opportunities that Puerto Ricans are facing in those areas. Now, in the last part of my presentation, what I'd like to do is to quickly go through some of the main consequences of this huge diaspora, a renewed diaspora. Maria Lourdes Santiago presented yesterday some numbers of the last decade. I think it was about 250,000 people. But if you go back to 2000, we're talking about at least 500,000 people who have left Puerto Rico in this period of time. So how does that affect people who are, we saw some images earlier about people who say, yo no me quito, I'm not leaving. And of course, the other reaction that I heard yesterday, yo tampoco me quito, the ones who are here in the US, because they still feel Puerto Rican. But anyway, demographically, I think the main consequence is precisely this issue. Perhaps the photograph is a little too exaggerated. Viejo San Juan is not always empty, but less people on the island, certainly, and the trend toward an increasing number of people living on the island seems to be inexorable. I don't foresee any kind of renewed population growth on the island anytime soon. That has all kinds of impacts, including the issue of who's leaving. No? So it's not just that a lot of people are leaving, it's that it's mostly young, relatively well-educated people, many of them graduates of the University of Puerto Rico. Most of my former students in anthropology are not working on the island, but are here. And aging society, the distribution of the age structure of Puerto Rico is clearly one of the main challenges, I would say, for any kind of planning, any kind of policy in the next few years. Puerto Rico is already has a very high percentage of people over 65 years old, even more than the U.S. I think it's about 15 to 16%, if I don't remember, if I'm not mistaken. And it's also the most advanced age population structure in Latin America, except for Cuba, which also has a very difficult situation facing a larger number. And I wanted to use this picture as well to remind you of one other aspect, which is most of the elderly women in Puerto Rico, especially after beyond 75 years old, are women, and they are widows, and they are oftentimes by themselves, and they're poor. In many cases, of course, abuelas are the ones who take care of the younger children. But this is an issue that, regardless of what kind of program and what kind of political status will face Puerto Rico, it will clearly be something to think about and to take measure on. And of course, at the other extreme, Puerto Rico is already a country with a very small percentage of children at all ages under 18, and that has to do, it has been mentioned before, the closing of public and private schools. The university itself is facing a demographic crisis insofar as fewer and fewer students are graduating from high school, applying to college and university. So that is one other demographic aspect. And again, it has to do with migration. It's not the only issue, but it's only one of them. The decreasing demand for consumption, the fact that there are so many places that are now closing down, the vacancy rate, which is extremely high in Puerto Rico, are all related to these demographic changes, and particularly to the out-migration of young people from the island. A decreasing tax base. Somebody used, I think, the same image before of the Old San Juan murals, but also with this particular image of a woman with her luggage. So the fact that people are leaving and that these people are not paying taxes in Puerto Rico has just recently become an object of at least journalistic attention. And it is a problem. There are thousands of people who are not paying taxes in Puerto Rico, so that will lead again to a shrinking tax base on the island, aggravating all the problems that we've been talking about since yesterday. And I want to end on the one I think is an optimistic note. I usually present this image. This is from Orlando, the Festival Boricua de Orlando. Of course, whenever you have 2 or 3 Puerto Ricans, you have a festival. And,
That's right.
But this one in particular, I think, it captures much of the mood that I want to sort of end on, which is despite all of these difficult economic and demographic as well as political challenges, the diaspora in the United States is reaffirming its sense of Puerto Ricanness. And it's not just a flag, it's not just Honduras and other perhaps more daily kinds, but it's also the kinds of effort that we've learned about in this conference, organizing and trying to impact what's going on the island and helping to provide for different alternatives to the crisis. And finally, I think the issue of transnationalism is something that needs to be considered because of the fact that so many Puerto Ricans are living now in the United States. That does not necessarily mean that they are quitándose, that they are abandoning their country or, all of a sudden forgetting they're Puerto Rican. In fact, in many ways, I think Puerto Rican culture is being recreated and transformed, of course, here in the United States, wherever Puerto Ricans are settling. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Jose Caraballo Cueto, completed his PhD in economics at the New School for Social Research in 2012, where he specialized in econometrics, a statistics field, and development, obtaining honors in the latter. He had several presentations in academic conferences in different countries. Two of those presentations were at the United Nations, where he presented a new way of measuring civic engagement in 2012. And during the second time, he analyzed the economic development of the Dominican Republic in the International Day of Poverty Eradication in 2013. He was awarded a fellowship from the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, based in New York, and other grants to study development-related topics. Caraballo currently works as an assistant professor of statistics at the University of Puerto Rico at Calle, where he is also a regular researcher in the Institute for Interdisciplinary Research and the director of the Census Information Center. In the CIC, he has access to a comprehensive database on several socioeconomic aspects of Puerto Rico. Dr. Caraballo is the general coordinator of the first Human Development Report on Puerto Rico, a multi-sectoral research project done in tandem with the United Nations. He also was a statistical project manager in the Puerto Rican Institute of Statistics, where he was chair of the subcommittee of economic statistics and was in charge of many of the related projects. He is a member of several academic associations and has published a book, several peer-reviewed articles, and more than 60 op-ed essays in Puerto Rico and in other international outlets. Please help me to welcome him to our gathering today. His topic, by the way, will be the Great Depression of Puerto Rico, causes and possible solutions.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Professor, for that presentation. Puerto Rico is currently in its Great Depression, and I call it like that because if we compare this depression with the depression of the 1930s, this one is longer and deeper than the one that we have in the 1930s, where Puerto Rico was so dependent on the sugar production that we didn't experience such a huge decrease in production as we are doing right now. Just to have an idea, the size of the economy, which is the gross national income, adjusted by inflation, which is the way that we should compare figures in time, equals the size of the economy of 1999. The public debt represents over 98% of the size of the economy. More than 270,000 of jobs have been lost from the beginning of the Depression in 2006 to 2015, and more than 700,000 of Puerto Ricans have migrated in gross terms. The average salary is right now, adjusted by inflation, the same as